My mother announced that my baby belonged to my infertile sister. When I am Alyssa, 28, cradling my 3-month-old son Ethan as I type this with one hand. My sister Natalie and I were once inseparable. That changed at our family dinner last month. What should have been a celebration of Ethan's first months turned into a nightmare when my mother made an announcement that shattered my world. Now I am fighting an unimaginable battle against my own family who are determined to take my son. Before I begin my story, where are you watching from? Please like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up against family for what is right. Growing up in suburban Boston, I always looked up to my older sister Natalie. With just 2 years between us, we shared clothes secrets and dreams, despite our different personalities. I was the quieter one, who loved books and science, while Natalie was outgoing and popular. Our mother Margaret always seemed to favor Natalie, praising her accomplishments while critiquing mine. Dad stayed neutral, avoiding confrontation with Mum at all costs. After nursing school, I landed a job at Massachusetts General Hospital in the neonatal unit. The hours were long, but caring for newborns fulfilled me in ways I never expected. That is where I met James, an IT specialist who was upgrading the hospital systems. He asked me out after our third hallway conversation, and his quiet confidence won me over immediately. James and I moved in together after dating for a year. We talked about marriage, but were in no rush. Meanwhile, Natalie had married Thomas, a successful investment banker, in a lavish ceremony that Mum called the wedding of the century. They bought a sprawling house in an exclusive neighborhood, and Mum never missed an opportunity to mention how successful Natalie had become. Everything changed when Natalie and Thomas started trying for a baby. After a year with no success, they consulted fertility specialists. The diagnosis was devastating. Natalie had severe endometriosis that made natural conception nearly impossible. They tried 3 rounds of IVF over 2 years, each failure hitting Natalie harder than the last. I watched my sister transform during this period. The vibrant woman who lit up rooms became bitter and withdrawn. She would leave family gatherings when pregnancy announcements were made. She stopped attending baby showers. Her social media accounts became filled with quotes about the unfairness of life. I tried to support her, but she pushed me away, saying I could never understand her pain. When James and I discovered I was pregnant, it was unexpected but welcome news. We had discussed children someday, and though this accelerated our timeline, we were thrilled. Telling my family was nerve-wracking, especially breaking the news to Natalie. To my surprise, she hugged me and said all the right things, though her smile never reached her eyes. As my pregnancy progressed, my mother became unusually involved. She insisted on attending every doctor appointment and constantly made strange comments about family supporting each other through thick and thin. I assumed she was trying to include Natalie in the experience without making her feel worse about her infertility. When Ethan was born after 14 hours of labor, my mother insisted Natalie be in the delivery room despite my wishes for just James. Too exhausted to argue, I relented. The look on Natalie's face when she held Ethan for the first time should have alarmed me. She whispered to him, "Hello, little one. Aunt Natalie is here." But something in her tone sent shivers down my spine. In the weeks following his birth, Natalie showed an excessive interest in Ethan. She visited daily, always arriving with expensive gifts. She insisted on taking professional newborn photos, creating an elaborate nursery setup in her guest room for the shoot. She referred to herself as Ethan's other mummy, which made me increasingly uncomfortable. James noticed her attachment first. "Do you think Natalie is getting too attached to Ethan?" he asked one night after she had spent the entire day at our apartment and cried when it was time to leave. I dismissed his concerns, believing that my sister was working through her grief by bonding with her nephew. I thought the attachment would fade as she processed her feelings. "Family helps family," I told James, echoing my mother's words. "Natalie just needs time." Little did I know that time was exactly what Natalie and my mother were counting on as they executed a plan I could never have imagined. When Ethan turned 3 months old, my mother insisted on hosting a family dinner to celebrate this milestone. Though exhausted from sleepless nights with a colicky baby, I agreed, thinking it would be nice to have a meal I did not have to cook. We arrived at my parents' colonial-style home on a Sunday evening. Mum had decorated the dining room with blue balloons and a banner that read, 3 months of joy. Something about the wording struck me as odd, but I brushed it aside. The moment we entered, Natalie rushed to take Ethan from my arms. "There's my precious boy," she cooed, not even greeting James or me. She carried him away to show him off to my father and aunt, who had also been invited. Throughout dinner, Natalie kept Ethan on her lap, refusing my offers to take him when he became fussy. "I have got this," she insisted. "You eat." Mommy deserves a break. The word mummy from her lips made my skin crawl, but I remained silent, not wanting to create tension. After the main course, my mother stood to make a toast, champagne flute in hand. Her voice carried a forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on alert. Family means everything, she began. We share our joys and our burdens. When one of us is blessed, all of us are blessed. When one suffers, we all suffer. She looked pointedly at Natalie, who was bouncing Ethan on her knee. Which is why tonight is so special. Tonight we celebrate not just Ethan's 3 months, but a new beginning for our family. Confusion spread through me as my mother continued. As you all know, Natalie and Thomas have tried desperately to have a child of their own. Their journey has been heartbreaking. She paused dramatically, which is why Alyssa's decision is so beautiful and selfless. I froze fork midway to my mouth. What decision? Alyssa has agreed to give Ethan to Natalie and Thomas, my mother announced with a broad smile. After all, family helps family. Natalie will finally have the baby she deserves, and Alyssa can focus on her career, knowing her son is in loving hands within the family. The room spun around me. James reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it hard enough to bring me back to reality. What are you talking about? I whispered, my voice failing me. My mother waved dismissively. Don't be modest, sweetie. Natalie told me all about your conversations, how you understood that she and Thomas could give Ethan advantages you cannot, how you agreed that since you got pregnant so easily, this was meant to be. I never said that. I managed, looking at my sister, who was now clutching Ethan protectively against her chest. Natalie, what is she talking about? Don't backtrack now, Natalie said softly. You knew this was the plan all along, ever since you told me you were pregnant. No, I said more firmly. I never ever agreed to give you my son. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to meet my eyes. His discomfort suggested this plan was not his idea, and perhaps he was hearing it for the first time too. James stood abruptly. This is insane, he said, his usual calm demeanor gone. Ethan is our son. There was never any agreement, conversation, or plan to give him to anyone. He walked around the table toward Natalie. I am taking our son home now. Natalie turned away, shielding Ethan with her body. No, he belongs with me. Tell them, Mom. My mother's face hardened. Alyssa, stop being selfish. You know Natalie has a gorgeous nursery already. She and Thomas can provide everything Ethan will ever need. You are being cruel to renege now. I found my voice at last, standing on shaky legs. I am not reneging on anything because I never agreed to this. Ethan is my son, mine and James's. This conversation is over. I reached for my baby. Natalie began to cry loud theatrical sobs that made Ethan wail in response. You promised. You know I cannot have a baby of my own. You said you would help me. My father, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Margaret, what exactly is going on here? My mother glared at him. David, stay out of this. This is between the girls. James managed to take Ethan from Natalie's arms while she was distracted arguing with my mother. He handed him to me, then began collecting our diaper bag and jackets. You are not leaving with our baby, Natalie shrieked, lunging toward me. James stepped between us. That's enough. We are leaving now, and if anyone tries to stop us, I will call the police. My mother shifted tactics instantly, tears filling her eyes. Alyssa, how could you do this to your sister after everything this family has done for you? This is how you repay us, by being selfish. Keeping my own child is not selfish, I replied, my voice shaking as I backed toward the door with Ethan whimpering against my shoulder. He is supposed to be our baby, Natalie said, her expression chilling me to the bone. You are just the vessel. That was the plan. Those words confirmed my worst fear. This was not a misunderstanding. They had been plotting this all along. The drive home was tense, with Ethan finally sleeping in his car seat. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my mother and Natalie. I finally turned it off, unable to bear their accusations. I cannot believe what just happened, James said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Your mother and sister are delusional. When we arrived home, I broke down in our living room, sobbing uncontrollably while James held me. They really thought I would give them my baby, I kept repeating. My own mother tried to take my child. I won't let that happen. James promised, his face grim with determination. We will protect Ethan, whatever it takes. As I nursed Ethan to sleep that night, a new text came through from Natalie. This isn't over. He belongs with me. The week following the dinner was a nightmare of constant harassment. My phone exploded with calls and messages from my mother and Natalie, alternating between guilt trips, pleas, and thinly veiled threats. I blocked their numbers, but they created new accounts on social media to continue their campaign. "Your sister is devastated," my mother wrote. "How can you sleep at night knowing you have broken her heart again?" Natalie's messages were more disturbing. "I already love him more than you ever could. He should be with his real mother." The harassment extended beyond messages. My mother began calling extended family members, spreading lies that I was suffering from postpartum depression and unable to care for Ethan properly. My cousin Susan called me concerned after hearing I had abandoned my baby for days while having a breakdown. I spent hours setting the record straight, but the damage to my reputation was already spreading. One Tuesday morning, I was home alone with Ethan when someone knocked on our apartment door. Thinking it was the package I had been expecting, I opened it without checking the peephole. Natalie pushed her way inside, her eyes wild and focused on Ethan, who was napping in his bassinet. "I just want to take him for a little while," she said, moving toward the baby. "You need a break, Alyssa. You look terrible." I blocked her path. "Leave now, Natalie, or I am calling the police." She laughed. "And tell them what that his aunt wants to babysit. Don't be dramatic." When I pulled out my phone, she finally backed toward the door. "This could be so easy if you would just cooperate. Think about what is best for Ethan." After she left, I called James in a panic. That evening, he installed security cameras at our front door and windows. "Better safe than sorry," he said grimly. 2 days later, the cameras captured Natalie standing outside our apartment at 2 a.m., just staring at our windows for nearly an hour before leaving. The footage chilled me to the bone. The following week, Natalie showed up at the hospital where I had returned to work part-time. She created a scene in the lobby, loudly telling anyone who would listen that I had stolen her baby. Security escorted her out, but the damage to my professional reputation was immediate. Co-workers gave me concerned looks, and my supervisor called me in to discuss the personal issues affecting the workplace. Their campaign moved online next. Natalie created posts with photos of Ethan she had taken during her visits, writing captions like, "Missing my baby boy today," and "Counting the days until you are home where you belong." Her friends commented with supportive messages, unaware of the truth, calling her a mother-in-waiting, and promising that "your baby will be with you soon." The lowest blow came when an anonymous call was made to Child Protective Services alleging that James and I were neglecting Ethan. The caseworker, a tired-looking woman named Paula, arrived unannounced one Saturday morning. "We have to investigate all reports," she explained as she inspected our apartment, opened our refrigerator, and examined Ethan for signs of neglect. Finding nothing amiss, she admitted the call seemed unfounded. "Unfortunately, we see this in family disputes. Just keep documenting everything." The stress began taking a physical toll. I lost weight. My milk supply diminished, and I lived in constant fear of what they might try next. James suggested changing our locks after finding signs someone had attempted to enter our apartment while we were out. When the locksmith arrived, he discovered our lock had indeed been tampered with. "Someone tried to pick this," he confirmed, installing a more secure deadbolt. That night, we did a thorough inventory of the apartment and realized several items from Ethan's nursery were missing, including a special blanket and some clothes. Even more disturbing, Ethan's birth certificate was no longer in the file where I kept important documents. James called my parents' landline, putting it on speaker. When my father answered, James demanded to know if my mother had given Natalie a key to our apartment. There was a long pause before my father answered. "I think you should talk to your mother about this." "Put her on the phone," James said, his voice tight with controlled anger. My mother came on the line. "Alyssa, this ridiculous standoff needs to end. Natalie is Ethan's rightful mother in every way that matters. You are just being stubborn. Did you give her a key to our apartment?" I demanded. "I made a copy when you asked me to water your plants last month," she admitted without a hint of remorse. Natalie needed access to her baby's things. "He is not her baby," I shouted, losing my composure entirely. "What you are doing is illegal. It is breaking and entering, harassment, and attempted kidnapping." "Do not be so dramatic," my mother scoffed. "Family helps family. You are the one causing all this trouble." My father's voice came on the line unexpectedly. "Alyssa, your mother and sister may have gone about this the wrong way, but their intentions are good. Natalie has a beautiful nursery-ready financial security, and she can be a full-time mother. Is that not what is best for Ethan?" His betrayal hurt more than I expected. "Dad, would you have given me away to Aunt Carol when I was a baby if she couldn't have children?" The silence that followed was damning. "We will be pursuing a restraining order," James said firmly before hanging up. That evening, Thomas called my cell phone. "I am sorry about all this," he said, sounding genuinely distressed. "I had no idea how far Natalie would take this. She has become obsessed with having Ethan. I found her filling out paperwork with your names on it, practicing your signatures. I think she is planning something legal. I am considering filing for divorce. This is not the woman I married." His warning sent a new wave of panic through me. What legal angle could they possibly be pursuing? Then the next day, I was so distracted at work that I administered the wrong dose of medication to a patient. Fortunately, a colleague caught my mistake before any harm was done, but my supervisor placed me on administrative leave, suggesting I take time to sort out my personal issues. James found me curled up on our bed that evening, Ethan sleeping beside me. "We will get through this," he promised, though the worry lines around his eyes betrayed his own fear. "No one is taking our son from us." I wanted to believe him, but the relentless nature of my mother and sister's campaign had me questioning whether we could really win against their determination and resources. For the first time, I understood that they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, and what they wanted was my son. The legal nightmare began with a certified letter delivered to our apartment 3 weeks after the disastrous family dinner. Inside was a petition for grandparent visitation rights, filed by my parents, along with a separate document I had never heard of, a petition for third-party custody, filed jointly by my parents and Natalie. Panic sent me straight to Google, where I learned these legal mechanisms were typically used in cases where biological parents were unfit. The petitions contained shocking allegations, claiming I was mentally unstable, that James had a drinking problem, and that we had verbally agreed to let Natalie adopt Ethan before changing our minds. "They are lying about everything," I told James, my hands shaking as I showed him the papers. "We need a lawyer," he replied. Now. The attorney we hired the next day, Susan Kingston, was a no-nonsense family law specialist with 20 years of experience. Her office was small but immaculate, with framed diplomas and certificates covering one wall. As she reviewed our documents, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "I have seen some aggressive custody disputes," she said finally, "but this is extraordinary. Your mother and sister seem to be exploiting a legal loophole normally reserved for cases where children are at risk." Susan explained that while their case was weak, we needed to respond immediately and prepare for what could be a lengthy legal battle. "Family court can be unpredictable," she warned. "Judges sometimes favor grandparents, especially affluent ones, who can provide material advantages." The retainer fee depleted our savings account, but we had no choice. The alternative was risking losing Ethan. Our first devastating blow came when the judge granted a temporary order allowing my parents supervised visitation once a week while the case proceeded. Susan assured us this was standard procedure, not an indication of how the final ruling would go. The first supervised visit occurred at a family services centre with a court-appointed observer present. I was required to bring Ethan and stay in the waiting room while my parents spent 1 hour with him. Natalie was not legally included in the visitation order, but somehow she was there too, having been brought as my parents' support person. Through the observation window, I watched in horror as Natalie changed Ethan into an outfit she had brought, a onesie with "Mommy's Little Angel" emblazoned across the front. My mother took dozens of photos despite the supervisor's instructions that photography wasn't allowed. When I complained to the supervisor, she made a note, but allowed the visit to continue. "Document everything," Susan had advised, so I kept a detailed log of every concerning incident, including timestamps and exact quotes. At the second visit, Natalie attempted to leave the room with Ethan, claiming she needed to change his diaper in the restroom. When the supervisor blocked her path, Natalie became hysterical, screaming that her son was being kept from her. Security was called and the visit ended early. This incident resulted in a temporary restraining order against Natalie, prohibiting her from attending future visits. My parents were furious, blaming me for turning the court against family. James's technical skills proved invaluable when he recovered deleted text messages from an old phone I had used during my pregnancy. The messages revealed a disturbing conversation between my mother and Natalie, dating back to when I first announced my pregnancy. "Alyssa's baby could be the answer to our prayers," my mother had written. "She has never been maternal. Once the baby comes, she will be overwhelmed. That is when we suggest helping more permanently." Natalie had replied, "Do you really think she would give me her baby? She might not have a choice if we play this right," my mother had responded. These messages, along with others, suggesting they had been planning this for months, were immediately submitted to our attorney and the court. Thomas contacted us again this time, offering to testify on our behalf. He provided Susan with Natalie's journal, which he had found hidden in their home office. The entries detailed her growing obsession with Ethan, referring to him as my baby boy, and outlining her plans to bring him home where he belongs. One particularly disturbing entry read, "Mother says once we establish regular access, we can file for emergency custody on grounds of Alyssa's instability. Then he will be mine forever." The journal was a bombshell, leading the judge to order psychological evaluations for all parties involved in the case. The court-appointed psychologist spent several hours with each of us, asking pointed questions about our family history, parenting philosophies, and the current dispute. 2 weeks later, we appeared for our first major court hearing. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined from television, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. My parents and Natalie sat on the opposite side of the room, my mother in an expensive suit projecting confidence. When the psychologist's report was presented, the judge's expression changed from neutral to concerned. The report stated that while I showed signs of anxiety consistent with being a new mother under stress, there was no evidence of instability or inability to parent. James was evaluated as a supportive partner with no substance abuse issues. Natalie, however, was flagged for concerning patterns of obsessive attachment and boundary violations, with a recommendation for further evaluation for potential personality disorders. My mother was described as controlling with a tendency to manipulate family dynamics. The judge listened to testimony from all parties, including Thomas, who described Natalie's increasingly erratic behavior and fixation on claiming Ethan. When my mother took the stand, she maintained that I had verbally agreed to share Ethan with Natalie, but could not provide any evidence beyond her own assertion. At the end of the hearing, the judge suspended all grandparent visitation pending further proceedings and extended the restraining order against Natalie to include my mother as well. As we left the courtroom, my mother hissed, "This is not over. You have no idea who you are dealing with." Unfortunately, I was beginning to understand exactly who I was dealing with, and the knowledge that my own family could be so ruthless left me feeling more alone than I had ever been. In the weeks following the court hearing, my mental health deteriorated rapidly despite the legal victories. I developed symptoms my doctor identified as anxiety and PTSD. I jumped at every noise, constantly checked the locks, and woke multiple times each night to make sure Ethan was still breathing in his crib. James suggested I see a therapist, and though initially resistant, I finally agreed after breaking down in tears when a car similar to Natalie's drove past our apartment. Dr. Lydia Carter specialized in family trauma and created a safe space for me to process the profound betrayal I had experienced. "What you are going through would break most people," she told me during our second session. "The people who are supposed to protect you are the ones causing harm. That is a special kind of trauma." Through therapy, I began to recognize patterns of manipulation that had existed in my family long before the current crisis. My mother had always pitted Natalie and me against each other, praising one while criticizing the other. She controlled through comparison guilt and conditional love. My father's constant passivity had enabled her behavior for decades. Meanwhile, the legal case continued to consume our lives. Despite the restraining order, Natalie was arrested for parking outside our apartment building, a clear violation that resulted in her spending a night in jail before my mother posted bail. Rather than serving as a wake-up call, the arrest seemed to fuel their determination. Anonymous packages began arriving at our door containing baby items with notes saying things like, "He should be with his real mother," and "A baby needs his grandmother." The handwriting matched my mother's, but without proof of who had delivered the packages, police could do little beyond documenting the harassment. When my grandfather, my father's father, passed away suddenly from a heart attack, I was faced with an impossible choice. Attending the funeral meant facing my parents and Natalie in violation of the restraining order. Not attending meant missing the chance to say goodbye to the only grandparent who had ever shown me unconditional love. In the end, James and I watched the live stream of the service. From our apartment, my heart breaking as I saw my father looking lost and my mother playing the role of grieving daughter-in-law to perfection. According to my Aunt Lisa, the only family member still speaking to me, my mother had told funeral attendees that I had abandoned the family in our time of grief. The extended family largely sided with my mother and Natalie, believing their version of events. Longtime family friends who had known me since childhood now avoided my calls or responded with uncomfortable platitudes about hoping we could all work things out. Only Aunt Lisa, my father's sister, who had always seen through my mother's manipulation, stood firmly on my side. "Your mother has been poisoning the family well for years. Lisa told me over coffee at a cafe far from our usual neighbourhoods. Most people find it easier to go along with Margaret than stand up to her. But what they are doing to you and Ethan is unconscionable. Lisa became our lifeline to family information, warning us when she heard my mother discussing new legal strategies, or when Natalie made concerning statements about getting her son back soon. The financial strain of the ongoing legal battle forced James to take on freelance IT work in addition to his full-time job. Even with the extra income, the mounting legal fees meant cutting back on everything except essentials for Ethan. I felt guilty for not contributing financially while on leave from the hospital, but James assured me that taking care of Ethan and maintaining my mental health were my most important jobs right now. Our landlord called us in for a meeting after receiving complaints from neighbours about the family drama disturbing the building. Apparently, Natalie had approached several neighbours, telling them concerning stories about us and asking them to report any strange behaviour. Though sympathetic after hearing our side, the landlord gently suggested we might be happier in a different living situation when our lease ended in 3 months. The crisis point came one rainy Tuesday when I collected our mail and found a small package. Inside was a doll with a photo of Ethan's face crudely photoshopped onto its head. A note read, "Practicing with this until I get the real thing." I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on the shower to mask the sound, and broke down completely. When James found me an hour later, I was still sitting fully clothed on the shower floor, the water long since gone cold. "Maybe we should move away," I whispered through chattering teeth as he wrapped me in towels. "Change our names, start over somewhere, they cannot find us." James helped me into dry clothes and made me tea before responding. "We could run," he said carefully, "but they would follow, and we would always be looking over our shoulders, teaching Ethan to live in fear. Is that what we want?" His words resonated through my fog of panic. "No," I said finally. "I want him to grow up knowing his parents fought for him, that we were strong." That night, after putting Ethan to sleep, we sat at our kitchen table and formulated a new approach. Instead of merely defending ourselves, we would go on the offensive. Susan had mentioned the possibility of countersuing for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We decided it was time to pursue every legal option available. As I fell asleep that night with James's arm protectively around me and Ethan's monitor glowing softly on the nightstand, I felt a new determination forming from the ashes of my breakdown. I had hit rock bottom, but that meant there was nowhere to go but up. "We are not just playing defense anymore," Susan announced at our strategy meeting the following Monday. We had expanded our legal team to include Patrick Donovan, a specialist in family harassment cases. His reputation for aggressive courtroom tactics was exactly what we needed. "Your mother and sister have made a critical error," Patrick explained, reviewing the evidence we had compiled. "They have left a clear paper trail of harassment and conspired to separate a child from fit parents. The courts take a very dim view of this behaviour." We filed a countersuit against my mother, father, and Natalie, alleging harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and attempted parental alienation. The complaint detailed every incident from the initial announcement through the most recent harassment, supported by text messages, emails, security footage, and witness statements. Meanwhile, I started an anonymous blog documenting our experience, changing names and locations to protect our privacy. I hadn't expected much response, but within days, comments began flooding in from people who had experienced similar family custody battles. "My mother-in-law tried to take my daughter too," wrote one commenter. "Stay strong. Document everything." The truth eventually comes out. Through these connections, I found a support group for parents facing family court battles. The weekly online meetings became a crucial outlet for processing my emotions with people who truly understood. One member connected us with Family Justice Alliance, an advocacy group specializing in reform of family court procedures. A volunteer attorney from the Alliance reviewed our case pro bono and suggested additional legal strategies that Susan and Patrick eagerly incorporated. "Your case could set an important precedent," she told us. "Courts need to recognize that biological connection alone doesn't entitle someone to a child." Thomas filed for divorce from Natalie, citing her obsession with taking Ethan as the final breaking point in their already strained marriage. His attorney coordinated with Susan, providing a sworn affidavit detailing Natalie's deteriorating mental state and fixation on claiming my son. "She transformed our home office into a nursery identical to Alyssa's," his statement read. She spent hours studying photographs of Ethan's room to replicate it, exactly saying he would transition more easily if everything looked familiar. Thomas also revealed a disturbing financial arrangement. My mother had promised Thomas a significant investment in his business if he supported Natalie's pursuit of Ethan. I initially dismissed it as Margaret's usual manipulation, he stated. I never believed they would go this far. Armed with this new information, our lawyers filed for an emergency hearing. The judge, already familiar with our case, expedited the request. 2 days later, we were back in court, watching my mother's face as Thomas's affidavit was read into evidence. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. The carefully controlled society matron image crumbled, replaced by a flash of raw fury quickly suppressed. Natalie, sitting beside her, appeared increasingly agitated as the hearing progressed, whispering frantically to her attorney. More evidence emerged when a former neighbour of my parents came forward after reading about our case in the local newspaper. She described witnessing disturbing interactions between my mother and young children years ago, including an incident where my mother had told another child's parent, "You're raising him all wrong. He would be better off with someone who knows what they're doing." A former friend of Natalie's contacted us through our attorney, offering information about Natalie's obsession with having a baby. When Alyssa announced her pregnancy, Natalie called me in tears. Her statement read, "She said it wasn't fair that Alyssa got pregnant so easily when she couldn't have children. She said she deserved a baby more than Alyssa did and that she would have one way or another. I dismissed it as grief talking, but now I see she meant it literally." As these testimonies accumulated, several extended family members, who had initially sided with my mother, began reaching out to apologize. My cousin Susan admitted she had been manipulated by my mother's tearful phone calls, claiming I was mentally unstable. "Aunt Margaret can be very convincing when she cries," Susan said. "I should have known better." Dr. Carter helped me prepare psychologically for courtroom testimony, teaching me grounding techniques for managing anxiety and helping me articulate the emotional impact of my family's betrayal. "Your authentic voice is your most powerful weapon," she advised. "Speak your truth clearly and without shame." The judge ordered a comprehensive psychological evaluation, specifically for Natalie, appointing a forensic psychiatrist with expertise in obsessive disorders. The resulting diagnosis confirmed what we had suspected. Natalie was suffering from a severe fixation that had distorted her sense of reality regarding Ethan. The report recommended immediate intensive therapy and explicitly stated that any contact with Ethan would be detrimental to both Natalie's recovery and Ethan's well-being. The court appointed a guardian ad litem, an attorney named Michael Barnes, whose sole responsibility was representing Ethan's best interests. After thorough investigation, including home visits, interviews, and review of all evidence, Barnes filed his recommendation Ethan should remain with James and me, with no contact with my parents or Natalie, until significant therapeutic progress had been documented. At the final hearing, I took the stand, my voice surprisingly steady, as I recounted my mother's history of manipulation and control. She has always seen her children as extensions of herself, not as independent people with our own lives and choices. I testified, when I refused to give her what she wanted, she set out to destroy me. When my mother took the stand for cross-examination, Patrick methodically dismantled her carefully crafted narrative. Under pressure, she made a critical mistake. "Ethan would be better off with Natalie," she insisted. "Alyssa has always been the difficult child, the selfish one. She never thinks about what other people need." "So this isn't really about Ethan's best interests," Patrick pressed. "It's about punishing your daughter for not obeying you." My mother's face hardened. Sometimes children need to be taught lessons about family loyalty. The courtroom fell silent. In that moment, she had revealed her true motivation, and everyone, including the judge, had witnessed it. The judge's ruling came down firmly on our side. The petitions for grandparent rights and third-party custody were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could not be refiled. The temporary restraining order against my mother and Natalie was made permanent for 3 years, with provisions for renewal if necessary. Additionally, the judge ordered my parents and Natalie to pay our legal fees, citing their bad faith pursuit of custody. As we left the courthouse, James holding Ethan, while I clutched the court orders that guaranteed our son's safety, I felt both victorious and profoundly sad. I had won the right to keep my own child, but at the cost of the family I had grown up with. Yet watching James gently adjust Ethan's tiny hat against the autumn breeze, I knew without doubt that we were the only family that truly mattered now. 6 months after the court's final ruling, James, Ethan and I moved into a small house in a neighbouring town. The modest 2-bedroom cottage had a fenced yard where we installed a swing set for Ethan, who at 9 months was already trying to pull himself up on furniture. The security system was state-of-the-art with cameras James monitored through his phone. Our new address was known only to trusted friends and my Aunt Lisa, who had become a surrogate mother figure in my life. She visited monthly, bringing homemade cookies and genuine warmth that helped fill the void left by my estranged parents. "Your grandfather would be so proud of how you stood your ground," she told me one afternoon as we watched Ethan practicing his crawling on the living room floor. "He always said you had a quiet strength that people underestimated." We gradually built a chosen family of supportive friends. The parent group I had found online connected me with local mothers who had also experienced family trauma. Our weekly coffee meetings became a lifeline, a place where I could speak honestly about the complicated grief of losing my family of origin while celebrating the joy of motherhood. James received a promotion that allowed me to extend my leave from the hospital for another 6 months. The extra time with Ethan was precious, especially after nearly losing him to my mother and sister's schemes. Therapy with Dr. Carter continued helping me process the complex emotions of betrayal and loss. "You are grieving people who are still alive," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "That's sometimes harder than grieving the dead. There's no closure, just a chronic ache and constant decisions about boundaries." Through therapy, I established clear values for our new family structure. James and I committed to open communication, respect for each other's autonomy, and creating a home where Ethan would feel both secure and free to grow into his own person. About 8 months after the final court hearing, we received news that my mother and Natalie had moved to Arizona. Thomas, now divorced from Natalie, sent a brief email letting us know. "I thought you should be aware for your peace of mind," he wrote. "I hope you and your family are well." I responded with a simple thank you, appreciating his continued consideration of our safety. In a subsequent message, he shared that he had started therapy to understand his role in enabling Natalie's behavior. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted. "I will always regret my silence." On a rainy spring day, nearly a year after the family dinner that had changed everything, a letter arrived from my father. His handwriting on the envelope made my heart race, and I waited until James came home before opening it. "Alyssa," it began. "Words cannot express my shame for failing to protect you from your mother and sister's scheme. A father should defend his child, and I did not stand up for you when it mattered most. I have no excuses, only deep regret. I have left your mother and am staying with my brother while I figure out who I am apart from her influence. I do not expect forgiveness, but wanted you to know I recognize the harm done. If someday you might consider limited contact, I would be grateful for the chance to meet my grandson properly and begin to make amends. With love and remorse, Dad." I cried as James held me, emotions I had suppressed for months finally breaking free. The letter didn't heal the wounds, but it acknowledged them, which was more than I had expected from anyone in my family. After careful consideration and discussions with Dr. Carter, I decided to respond with clear boundaries. I told my father I needed more time before considering in-person contact, but was open to exchanging occasional emails. It was a tiny door left slightly ajar, neither fully closed nor wide open. As Ethan approached his first birthday, I reflected often on the concept of motherhood. What made someone a mother, not genetics alone, or desire, or even ability to provide material advantages? Motherhood was showing up daily with love and respect for your child as an individual, not an extension of yourself or a solution to your own needs. We celebrated Ethan's first birthday with a small gathering in our backyard. Aunt Lisa, James's parents, who had flown in from Colorado, and our close friends formed a circle of love around our son as he gleefully smashed his first cake. Looking around at these people who had stood by us through the darkest time, I realized we had indeed built a true family. The anonymous blog I had started as therapy became an unexpected resource for others facing similar battles. Messages arrived from parents across the country fighting their own family custody disputes. "Your story gave me courage to keep fighting," wrote one mother. I began advocating for family court reform, sharing our story with lawmakers interested in strengthening protections for parents against predatory custody claims. Through all of this, James remained my rock. On Ethan's birthday, after our guests had left and our son was asleep, he presented me with a small box containing a diamond ring. "This past year has shown me exactly who you are," he said, as I gasped at the simple but beautiful solitaire. "Your strength, your heart, your courage. I want to make official what we already know, that we are a family now and always." I said yes through happy tears, a moment of pure joy after so much pain. As spring turned to summer, we began discussions about possibly expanding our family when the time was right. The thought of another child no longer triggered anxiety about potential new custody battles. The legal precedent established by our case provided a measure of security, and I had developed confidence in our ability to protect our family. The most profound lesson from our ordeal was learning to trust my instincts. Had I listened to my initial discomfort with Natalie's attachment to Ethan, we might have avoided some of the trauma that followed. Now I honored those internal warning signals and set boundaries without guilt. Forgiveness remained a complicated journey. Dr. Carter helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't an event but a process, and that it didn't require reconciliation or continued relationship. Some days I felt compassion for my mother and sister, recognizing their actions stemmed from profound brokenness. Other days, remembering their calculated attempts to take my child, still triggered anger and fear. What remained constant was my commitment to breaking dysfunctional family patterns. Ethan would grow up understanding that love doesn't manipulate or control. He would learn that his voice matters, his boundaries deserve respect, and that family supports rather than undermines. Standing up to my mother and sister had required finding strength I didn't know I possessed. In fighting for my son, I had also fought for myself, reclaiming my autonomy and discovering my voice. Though the price had been higher than I could have imagined, the reward was a life of authentic connection and integrity. One evening, as I rocked Ethan to sleep, watching his eyelids grow heavy as I sang softly, a profound peace settled over me. The road ahead would have its challenges, but we had survived the worst. We had created something precious from the ashes of betrayal, a family built on choice, rather than obligation, on respect, rather than control. The journey of motherhood continues to unfold daily, bringing new lessons and joys. I still sometimes glance over my shoulder or check the locks twice, habits born from trauma that fade slowly. But increasingly, I look forward rather than back, focused on the future we are creating one day at a time. If you have ever had to stand up against family for what is right, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you find the strength to protect your boundaries? Please like and subscribe. If this story resonated with you, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the hardest battles reveal our true purpose and power. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that family is not always who you are born to, but who you choose to build your life with.